Just before we start properly, a quick note on spoilers. I know that a lot of people are not going to want to be spoiled on this game, so I've made sure to only record the first 2 zones or biomes. There will be some minor spoilers for things like mechanics, weapons, some character dialogue, not huge story beats though, but just letting you know in case you want to keep things as fresh as possible. Right, let's get on with the video. Hades 2. Now, this game being announced was a little bit of a surprise to me. Up until this point, Supergiant hadn't done any sequels. Everything they released was an original IP. But with game production now taking much longer and being much more expensive, studios are taking much less risk by going for these sequels to already successful IPs. And Hades 1 was nothing if not a very successful IP. But does Hades 2 live up to that legacy, and should you play it on Steam Deck? That's what we're here to talk about today. Now, I'm playing this game on an OLED model Steam Deck. However, if you're playing on an LCD, I think you're going to get the same performance from this game, and that's because it just runs great on Steam Deck. On first launch, it boots up with the max graphics settings already pre-selected, and it runs at a very smooth 90 frames per second. You're only going to see 60 on the screen, but that's because I've been capturing footage using a capture card that only goes up to 60 frames per second, but trust me, it goes to 90, and just to prove it to you, I'm going to include some phone recording footage showing the screen where the FPS counter is up at 90 during combat. Like I said, if you do have an LCD model, I still expect you to get the full amount of frames possible. Yes, sometimes the LCD Steam Deck does have a few less frames than the OLED, but it's not going to be such a huge difference that the LCD can't reach 60 frames. That would be a whole 30 frames less between the two models, and there's no way that that's happening. This game runs incredibly well on the Steam Deck. You shouldn't need to do any tinkerings with the settings. You should basically just be able to launch it and play and get basically the smoothest experience that you possibly can right from the get-go. The fan doesn't really turn on very much when you're playing either, and in terms of battery life, I'm getting somewhere between 3 to 4 hours on an OLED, which was quite a surprise to me, but a welcome one. This gives you time for plenty of runs. Because this game is a roguelike, the time of each run can vary, but the more you play through, you sort of get up to that point where each run tends to last on average a bit more than half an hour. And so having 3 to 4 hours of battery life versus, say, maybe 2 hours of battery life is a really great thing, because it just lets you fit in more runs on a single charge. I've said before that I think sleep mode works really well with roguelike games in particular, and that's because of those runs. You know, sometimes they can go from 30 to 60 minutes, and not everybody always has time to just sit down and do a full run all the way through. And so with sleep mode, you can pause and suspend between fights and just come back whenever you have the time and do a chunk more, and I really think that's a great feature specifically with this game. That really is kind of all there is to say about the technical side of playing Hades 2 on Steam Deck. I feel like this part of the video is quite a bit shorter than normal just because this game runs so well on Steam Deck. You're at max settings, full FPS, plenty of battery life, the colors really look great on an OLED screen, and I haven't had any kind of crashes or anything like that. This game is a dream to play on Steam Deck. So, is it any fun? Now, I didn't actually play very much of Hades 1. I don't really know why that is. I did quite like it, but maybe there was just a lot of other stuff that I was playing at the time. For whatever reason, I didn't really stick with it. If you are familiar with Hades 1 though, then I think you'll feel quite at home with Hades 2. It feels like more of the same, but with some great additions that I think really elevate the sequel and make it a little bit better in my eyes. So I'm not going to go into the story too deeply, but just to set the scene a little bit, in this game you're not playing as Zagreus anymore. Instead, you're playing as his long-lost sister Melinoë. Now, Melinoë is searching for the rest of her family, and you very quickly learn that the Hades of this game is actually the Titan Kronos. Now, Melinoë plays quite like Zagreus, but with a few key differences. The first one is that her cast, or the B button on Steam Deck, that marks an area on the ground that slows enemies or sometimes stops them from moving completely. And the second key difference is that all of her attacks, you can hold the buttons and charge them up, and then they have some kind of additional effect to them depending on which one it is that you're charging. Now, this sounds like a simple thing, but when combined with a lot of other things that I'm going to talk about in a second, it really does feel like it gives you a lot more agency on how you want to play the game. When you first start playing the game, the first few runs can feel sort of similar. However, the more you get into these runs and the more runs you do, a lot of variation does start to come into play. Like in the first game, when you clear a room, you will be granted the boon of one of the gods of Olympus, and this allows you to choose between 3 different power-ups that affect different aspects of your gameplay. Now, some of these are just plain and simple, your attacks do extra damage. Some of them are a bit different though, maybe you have a chance to make a mana orb appear when you do an attack, or maybe one of them will power up your run and make it so that you do damage as you sort of run past an enemy. Each god provides a few different options, and the more you play, the more chance there are of different gods coming to your aid. So by the time you've got quite a few runs under your belt, there's a good chance of that sort of random variation coming into play and making your runs feel quite different. And this sentiment continues with the upgrade systems as well. So the longer you play, the more and more different upgrade systems you unlock. There's not just sort of one upgrade system that you continue to work out through the whole game. Instead, there's quite a few, but you don't have access to all of them right away. The more you play, the more sort of different paths of upgrades there are that you can unlock. One of these is sort of your standard quest list, but there's also tarot cards that give you certain power-ups, there's trinkets, different weapons, there's resources that you can find with like a pickaxe, that kind of thing. The longer you go, the more upgrade systems you unlock to choose where you're going to try and funnel your resources into, and I've been really enjoying the progression that you feel from all of these different areas. It really does feel like there's so much to dig into the more that you play the game. Every time you come back from a run, there's usually something to unlock in one of the various different upgrade systems. Maybe you've got a new weapon that you've been looking forward to for a while. Maybe you've got a new trinket that gives you a little bit of a different twist to your gameplay style if you equip that one. As you keep playing, there's just more and more combinations of different powers and different upgrade systems that you can put together, and so this means that every run feels quite different from the last few that you've done before that. This is complemented extremely well by how good the game feels to actually play. The combat is just so smooth, the controls are really tight, and the gameplay is really fluid. My preferred way to play is with sort of these short range weapons, dashing in, landing a few different attacks and combos, and then dashing back out again. And so usually when I'm going through all the upgrades, I'm looking for ones that lean towards that style of gameplay. But there are a lot of different ways that you can play. No matter which way you play though, once you've got a bit of practice, it's super satisfying to sort of land all the combos that you're trying to do, get back out again. There's a lot of room for expression of skill in this game. There are a couple of weapons that I'm not such a fan of, but these provide sort of ranged and heavy options if that's kind of your thing. It's just not really my thing, but I think they should be there. I do like that they're included because it does give more variance. If somebody likes to play ranged or heavy, then that option's there. The upgrade systems kind of mean that each run you can also choose whether you're going to play specifically for this run and try and get as far as you can on this run, or whether you're going to use it instead to try and farm resources for the benefit of later runs. So when you clear a room, you tend to get the choice between a few different doors, and on those doors you can see what the reward will be at the end of that room. And usually they're either, another boon from a god, another power up, or they might be some currency which you then use to put towards the upgrade systems. And so sometimes if I'm close to sort of a milestone upgrade that I've been looking for a while, I'll sort of decide to sack a run and not get the power-ups, just so that I can instead go after the resources and make sure I get that power-up, for the benefit of the future runs, whilst, maybe I understand that I won't go so far on this run, and that's okay. So that just about covers gameplay, and I think it's a lot of fun. I'm going to quickly touch on some of the other aspects of Hades 2 that I really like at the moment, and those are mainly the character work and the music. Now, roguelikes aren't really well known for their storytelling, and just like in Hades 1, the story in this game comes to you in sort of small bits and pieces, and it's mainly through character dialogue when you talk to a god just before they grant you their boon. Now sure, I do prefer in sort of other genres when story takes much more of the center stage, but I do appreciate that the story in Hades 1 and Hades 2 and the way they sort of weave it through the gameplay does work a lot better than in a lot of other roguelikes. The gods do seem to appear at random, and so sometimes it can feel very clever when you talk to one god about something and then the next god you talk to has something to say about what the previous one said. Now, I don't know, maybe it's not quite as random as it seems in those moments, maybe some of them are scripted, but it does make you feel like the game has been very cleverly put together to sort of build that story through each run as you play. The characters give you just enough that you stay interested, and I like the voice acting for a lot of these. Most of these gods are softly spoken, which I sort of think speaks to the power of these deities, that they don't feel the need to be the loudest in the room.
A flash of silver, Lim and Oros. So, the sister blades have veiled themselves, do you?
The music is also really good in this game. It's pretty good when you're sort of just going around through the normal stages, but especially when you get to some of these boss fights, then the music sort of kicks it up a level, and I really enjoy these. The boss fights are really good anyway, and the music sort of enhances that. And their music is good enough that I think I could see some of these tracks making it into some of my regular playlists. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about is the fact that Hades 2 is currently an early access game when I'm recording this video, and what that means for you buying it now. The Steam page shows that Supergiant expect early access to continue for, the whole of 2024. So I'm recording this in June. That's at least another 6 months of the game not being fully completed. To give you an idea of where things are at, currently Hades 2 doesn't have an end to the story built in, at least when I'm recording this, and they plan to add much more content down the line. Things like new areas, new foes, new mechanics, changes to presentation, the interface, art, that kind of thing. It all seems to be on the table for additions and changes. Now, they've also said that the game will be more polished by the time that it releases, and I think that reading that can make things a bit misleading. It kind of makes the game sound a bit like the early access is half-baked, and I don't think that's the case at all. It already seems extremely polished with a lot of features in there right away ready for you to play, and they specifically highlight that they want to improve the character art, and I already think that the character art is really good in this game. I haven't seen any crashes or any bugs or anything like that, so I think anybody who's worried that the early access badge means that they're only going to be getting sort of like an incomplete buggy mess, rest assured that that definitely isn't the case. Their plan is to provide major patches every few months, and I'm excited to see what it is to come. I already think that the game is loads of fun and great to play on Steam Deck, and it sounds like it's just going to get better as the year progresses. So, should you play Hades 2 on Steam Deck? Hopefully I've given you enough information to answer that question. I think the game is really fun. I'm really impressed with how it plays on the Steam Deck, and there's a lot more to come down the line. Fans of the first game especially, I think, will like it. However, I can totally understand people who sort of want to wait for that full release to be available, maybe in 2025. But I also think that given that this is a roguelike and you sort of do repeated runs anyway, getting it now, having fun with it, and then every time that major patch comes out every few months, it sort of might give you an excuse to dive back in for a few extra runs to see what's changed. What do you think? Are you going to pick up this game, or maybe you're already enjoying it? Maybe you're waiting for that final release? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.